Chapter 11. Hamad Farsi strode to Andrew Harvey's desk and waited until the group leader finished his phone call. Special Branch picked up Marcus Taylor this morning and showed him some mugshots. He picked out Simon Baines. Marcus Taylor? Harvey asked, a look of confusion on his face. He was with Joseph Alemwu on the night he was abducted, Farsi reminded him. Great news, but it does us no good at all if we can't find these guys. Any news from the security agencies? None. We tried the company Gray sold, and while they are still on the books, they haven't had an assignment for the last 2 months. We also contacted all security firms on our lists, and none of them have heard of our guys. Have we checked the airports and ferries? Harvey asked. No it's there either. Unless they got hold of new identities, these guys are still in the country. Gray could have paid for new identities, of course. He has a lot of money unaccounted for, and that's not the kind of thing you buy with a debit card. But some of these guys have families. Do you think it likely that they would abandon them? It's possible, but I doubt it. Let's concentrate our search on guest houses and bed and breakfasts. They may be together, or they may have dispersed around the country. So let each establishment know we're looking for one or more men matching their descriptions. We can try, Farsi said. But these guys are used to spending weeks in a hole in the Iraqi desert or a sodden field in Bosnia. They could be anywhere in Britain, and if they don't want to be found, they could quite easily make themselves disappear. I think the last place they will choose will be a B&B. I know, Harvey said, a little too harshly. But we have to start somewhere. Sonny, leave that porn site alone and come and butter this bread. These sausages are nearly ready. Oh, and wash your hands first. Simon Baines clipped Tristram Barker-Fink around the back of the head as he passed. Cheeky bastard! I was checking the BBC News website. Anything new? Barker-Fink asked as he turned the sausages. Nothing in the last hour, Sonny said. I was looking at some of the readers' comments, and there's a lot of support for what Tom's doing. A few nutjobs want things left as they are, but most of them want a change. A couple of them even called him an hero. I think they have a point. He's risking everything to see it through. That's some sacrifice. If the government falls for it, that is, Sonny said. If they don't, this has all been for nothing. Sonny, if the country votes for this bill, there is no way the government can refuse a referendum. Of course they can. You know what politicians are like. They can spin it every which way and make it sound like they are doing the country a favour. Look at the expenses scandal. They claim to have cleaned everything up, but then they put a new tax avoidance bill through Parliament that closes loopholes for everyone in the country except MPs, who are still allowed to exploit it. They only care about themselves, and if this bill is going to make life uncomfortable for them, they will drop it like a hot brick. We'll see. The results will be in at noon tomorrow, and 24 hours later we'll hear what the PM has to say, and this will all be over. And in the meantime we're stuck on this fucking barge, Sonny said. There's no room to move, and we can't even stick our heads out the door. It stinks of farts and sweat, and all we've eaten is egg banjos, sausage sarnies and fry-ups. The vessel they were renting was a 6-berth narrowboat, although it was designed more for a family with young children than 8 burly soldiers. That explained why 2 of them had such cramped sleeping quarters and another 2 slept on the floor. The Norfolk Broads were relatively quiet at this time of year, and with only 1 person required to pilot the boat, the rest could remain under cover. The group had decided in advance that Carl Levine, with his previous experience of narrowboating, would be the one to show his face. He had grown a full-face beard and shaved his head. A pair of sunglasses completed the look, which allowed him to be seen on deck without being recognised. It was also his job to procure the food from the local shops, and as his wife forbade him from eating anything high in cholesterol, he had chosen everything he had missed in the last 5 years. This is the first chance I've had in ages to eat what I want, and I plan to make the most of it, Levine said.
Why don't you just tell your wife to cook you some decent food? Avery asked.
Because my wife doesn't take orders, she issues them. That's the way it is, was, and always will be.
Carl, I've met your wife, and she's a pussycat, Paul Bennett said. You keep banging on about her being some kind of monster, but whenever we get together, she's always been an absolute diamond.
Yeah, when you're with her, she plays the shy little girl. But once you're gone, she chews me a new arsehole for drinking 3 beers or eating anything containing a gram of fat.
Then cook something decent when she's at work, Fletcher suggested.
She can't work, Carl said. Not with what she's got.
What has she got? Fletcher asked solemnly, thinking he must have missed some recent news.
A lazy fucking disposition, Carl said, deadpan, bringing chuckles from the others.
I can't believe you're scared of a woman, Sonny snorted. If she's always whining, why don't you leave her?
For the same reason we don't leave you for whining about the food, and why we don't moan when you snore all night, Carl said from the dining table. Speaking of food, where are my sausages?
Barker Fink brought the pile of sandwiches over, and all 8 men added their choice of condiments before wolfing them down. Sonny nudged Len Smart, distracting him from his Kindle. What you reading, Bookworm?
Fatal Exchange by Russell Blake. It's about a hot female bike messenger.
Sounds corny, Sonny smirked.
Stunning would be more accurate, Smart said, returning his attention to the book. Besides, she'd kick your sorry ass.
I could murder a beer, Michael Fletcher said to no one in particular.
Patience, laddie, Levine said. A couple more days and you'll get your piss up. At 8:30 on the dot, Tom Gray sat in front of the webcam and started the video stream. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I have the results for Adrian Harper. As with the previous day, he checked the values shown on the website as well as the values sent through his other software. After a moment tapping at the keyboard, he looked into the camera. As you can see from the results which have just appeared on your screen, the majority of the votes are to free Adrian. He stood up and walked over to the cell, holding the second prisoner. After standing in the doorway for a moment, staring at the teenager, he stepped back and closed the door before returning to the camera. Adrian will be allowed to leave here on Thursday. The people of Britain have voted, and I have found no discrepancies, so I will honour your wishes. After more tapping on the keyboard, he addressed the camera one last time. Tomorrow it is the turn of Joseph Elemwu to learn his fate. Joseph is 19 years old and has a criminal record stretching back 7 years. His speciality is street robbery, but he also has convictions for burglary, assault, and possession of a Class A drug with intent to supply. You, the people of Britain, have already shown that you are unwilling to sentence a man to death. That is understandable, and it is why you have to think carefully about your next choice. Gray held up a weapon and showed it to the camera. There were 6 thin branches bound together at the handle. There was more binding up to the halfway point, with the remaining 20 inches allowed to flex independently. If you think Joseph has had all of his chances, vote die to the usual email address shown on your screen. If you think he just deserves to be birched, vote live. If you don't think he deserves either of these punishments, do not vote. This will give a true indication of how the people of Britain feel. I also urge you to vote on my Justice Bill. You can download a copy from this website using the link at the top of the page. Voting on the bill closes at 11:30 tomorrow morning, so don't hang around. When the transmission ended, Andrew Harvey closed the browser and turned to his team. We got lucky today, people, but tomorrow a kid is either going to get birched or shot. Diane, we need that device. He used his position within his old company to gain access to Northern Industries, so maybe he also used that position to gain access to wherever he planted it.
Go through his company records to see which businesses he has provided advice to, then search them all. Harvey turned to Farsi. Hamad, Gray's last visit to Northern Industries was the 7th of March. I want you to put all CCTV from his last address and a 15-mile radius through facial recognition and see if we can follow a trail. Take it from that date and use who you need from the training pool to do the same for the other major cities. We need to know everywhere he's been in the last 40 days. Farsi scratched the back of his head. That's a huge task, Andrew. There must be millions of hours of CCTV to go through. I know, but we need something, anything, to get a lead on where he planted that device. Our second priority is finding those who helped him. What's the latest? I passed the assignment to Special Branches you asked, and they'll be asking Plod to make enquiries. They have recent photos of all 8 men, and local forces will be going to all B&Bs in their own districts. Do you want me to pass it to the media too? Harvey thought for a moment. Do it. Tell them these people are not to be approached. We just want information on their whereabouts. Diane, get onto GCHQ and ask them if they can trace any signals going into Gray's location. If someone calls him, can we identify the source? Lane nodded and went to make the enquiry. She returned a few minutes later to inform him that it could be done. Harvey thanked her and went to share an idea with his boss. He knocked on Hammond's door and waited to be called in. My plan, he said, is to give the mugshots to the media, and after a few hours we release a statement saying we have arrested these men. Hopefully this will either get Gray to contact them or one of them to contact him. Or let Gray know we are desperate, Hammond offered. And he'd be right, but I was thinking of giving them time to contact each other and then releasing a statement saying it was mistaken identity. He must appreciate that that kind of thing might happen, especially with the whole country on alert. Okay, Hammond said, after a moment. Release the details to the media and announce the arrests 4 hours after it goes out. And give it another 3 hours and say it was a mistake. If they haven't been in touch with each other by then, they are unlikely to fall for it. It's getting late, so release the pictures to the media now, but leave the arrest announcement until the morning when they are more likely to see it. Harvey nodded and left to pass on the instructions. At his desk he found several updates on the internal messaging system about other cases. He flicked through them, assigning them to the relevant operatives, annotating them with his own notes and instructions. He was coming towards the end of the list when one name made him search his memory. Abdul Mansour. He knew the name but couldn't quite place it, so he searched for his file and brought up the summary page. Abdul Mansour was listed as having been responsible for training a terrorist cell which was smashed in 2009. The cell had been planning an attack on a shopping centre in the capital, using Heckler & Koch MP 5K machine pistols and dozens of homemade pipe bombs, but unwittingly they had taken an MI5 operative into their fold. 2 of the terrorists had travelled to one of the many training camps in Pakistan near the Afghanistan border, and on their return they'd mentioned that they had met Mansour. He had been unknown to MI5 prior to their visit, but by their accounts he was an up-and-coming figure in the Taliban. It was Mansour who had led their training, and he had possessed an extensive knowledge of London, leading the security services to wonder if he was a British national. Their investigations led them to conclude that Mansour was in fact Ahmed Al-Ali, a student from Ladbroke Grove. His parents had arrived in the UK from Pakistan in the late 80s, and Ahmed was born a year after they were naturalised as British citizens. Al-Ali had been a bright student with good grades. As a teenager, he had been spotted at several anti-war protests and was known to frequent a mosque the security services had taken an interest in. In 2007, he had boarded a flight to Pakistan with minimal luggage, and that was the last that had been seen of him. Sources in Pakistan had no information on him, and it was only a few months later that Abdul Mansour came onto the scene. That name first came up when the CIA captured and interrogated a member of the Taliban. Mansour had been seen with several other high-ranking members. The description sounded a lot like Al-Ali, except that he was now sporting a full beard. As was typical of the CIA, they decided to keep this information to themselves. It wasn't until his name had been mentioned in 2009 that MI5 asked for any information the CIA had on him and saw the link. However, when the CIA reported Mansour as having been a victim of a drone attack in January 2010, which killed several insurgents just inside Afghanistan, his file had been closed. Now, it seemed, the facial recognition software at Heathrow Airport had found an 80% match for Mansour based on his student ID photograph. The alert had been downgraded due to his current status, deceased, but had been recorded nonetheless. Harvey passed an annotated version of the alert to the analysts, asking that it be passed to one of the juniors to see what they could find out about the passenger, a Pakistani national named Rahman Jamshed. It would probably come to nothing, but it was good experience for them. He yawned and rubbed his eyes. A glance at his watch told him that he had been at the office for over 14 hours. Time to head home and get some rest, he thought, although no matter how tired he was, he knew sleep would not come easily. Chapter 12. Tuesday, 19th of April 2011. Sally Clarkson turned on her computer and immediately took the novel from her handbag, opening it at the bookmark. The computer, like all others in the building, held her information in a central repository rather than on the local hard drive. This way, if her computer were corrupted or the hard drive failed, she would not lose any of her work. The downside of this was that it took around 5 minutes to load the security profile. She used this time to catch up on her favourite detective series. She was just about to find out how Lester Stone was going to escape from the furnace when her computer beeped, announcing that it was ready for her username and password. Putting her book to one side, she entered her details and hit the Enter key. A few moments later, her profile appeared, and she went straight to her email inbox. There were only 3 messages, none of which were important. She then opened the internal messaging system and saw one from Andrew Harvey. Her heart began to race as she read the message and instructions. A real investigation at last. After 8 months of learning the service processes and policies, followed by filing, classifying and looking for trends in the volumes of available data, she was finally getting to do some real detective work. Her love of crime stories had begun in her late teens, and her personal library of detective novels filled 3 shelves in her 1-bedroom apartment. At the age of 19, she had applied to be a Metropolitan Police officer and had attended the one-day assessment at Hendon. But during one of the role-play scenarios, she had shown that she was easily intimidated and didn't have the ability to assert herself in pressure situations. With her detective career over before it had begun, she had then turned her attentions to the security service, hoping to get a role as an intelligence officer, but her test scores had been slightly too low for that role. They were, however, good enough to qualify for an intelligence analyst position, and she had jumped at the chance. She sat back and tried to steady her breathing. Right, where do we begin? The airport, of course. Sally looked up the access page for immigration control and sifted through the entries for the previous day, filtering the results by flight departure point. Within seconds, she had the entry for Jamshed Rahman and looked through the details. He had a 6-month visitor's visa and had given his address as Green Street in Forest Gate, a largely Pakistani community. Sally Clarkson printed out both the airport image and the image of Ahmed Al-Ali and put them in her bag. After checking that she had her smartphone, she locked her computer and headed downstairs to arrange her cover details. The BBC News channel had been running pleas from parents of two of Gray's remaining hostages for the previous 24 hours, and it was beginning to bore him. Both sets of parents were saying the same thing, that their son was a good lad and didn't deserve any of this.
Yes, proper little saints, Gray thought, as the sequence began again for the umpteenth time.
However, once it had finished, the newscaster announced that the parents of the fifth boy, Joseph Olemwu, would be speaking to them live in the studio after the weather report. Gray did a quick scan of the monitors, and satisfied that there would be no interruptions in the next few minutes, he sat back to watch, hoping for something more original from this family. He wasn't disappointed. The parents were introduced as Olafina Olemwu and Michael Vincent. The mother was in her late 40s and had probably been quite a catch in her youth, but the years hadn't been kind to her. The father, in his 50s with a short white beard and shaven head, sat a good 9 inches taller than her. It was clear from the outset that though the mother simply wanted her boy back, the father's only intention was to have a dig at the authorities.
"I want to know what the police are doing to rescue my boy,"
was his opening statement, before he had even been asked a question. "Mr. Vincent, I'm sure the police are doing everything in their power to try to resolve this without loss of further life," the newscaster said, before turning her attention to the mother. "Mrs. Olemwu, these must be terribly difficult times for you. What would you like to say to Tom Gray?"
"I want him to think about what he is doing. Joseph may not be an angel, but he is loved in the eyes of the Lord just as much as every other person on this planet. It is not for Tom Gray to play judge, jury, and executioner. It is God who will guide Joseph onto the proper path."
Before the newscaster had a chance to move on to the next question, the father continued his rant.
"The police are on Joseph's back day and night, but when this happens they won't do anything. If he was a white kid with rich parents, they would be storming that place by now, but because he is just a poor black kid from a council estate, they sit on their hands and do nothing."
"Mr. Vincent, if the police were to attack Tom Gray, it might well mean the deaths of thousands of innocent people," the newscaster reminded him. "I'm sure this has nothing to do with the colour of your son's skin or his background."
"You say that, but if it was a white politician's son in there, they would have sent in the SAS, SWAT and God knows who else to get him out. The government just don't care about poor black people, and this proves it. They are going to sit back while the world watches my son die."
Olafina put a hand on her partner's arm to calm him down, but he shrugged it off.
"This man is a coward, but the government is scared of him. He doesn't even have the balls to face up to his crimes."
While the newscaster moved on quickly, Gray smiled and turned on the prepaid mobile phone, which had the BBC Newsroom's number on speed dial. Once the parents had had their 4 minutes in the limelight, he hit the button, asked for the producer, and gave his code word. Within a minute, he was live on air. "Good morning, Mr. Gray. I understand you are joining us to give your reaction to Mr. Vincent's claims. Is that correct?"
That's right, Sharon. He surely will have noticed that there are 5 boys here and only 1 is black. Therefore his claim that the police are doing nothing because of his son's colour has no merit.
"I was actually referring to his claim that you are a coward."
Ah, I must admit I found that strange. I am showing my face to the nation, so everyone knows who I am. Does he think I should be braver like his son, going around in a gang, attacking and robbing innocent people, then running off to escape the consequences?
"Mr. Gray, I think he was referring to the fact that you intend to take your life when this is all over. Isn't that escaping the consequences too?"
In case you haven't noticed, Sharon, there is a global recession and Britain didn't escape its effects. The ordinary working people of Britain are feeling this more than anyone, and I don't want to add insult to injury, if you'll pardon the pun, by taking part in a trial which could cost the ordinary taxpayer millions of pounds. This way is much simpler and a whole lot cheaper for the nation."
The news anchor pressed the point.
Couldn't you just plead guilty and avoid a trial, Mr. Gray? Or don't you feel you are guilty of any crimes?
Far from it, Sharon. I know I am guilty and deserve to be punished, but once again we come back to the current justice system and the fact that I have been informed that I will face charges under the Terrorism Act. Firstly, I don't consider myself a terrorist and would fight those charges to the bitter end. Secondly, I will also be charged with murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, and a variety of other charges. Even if I plead guilty to all these charges, the sentences will probably run concurrently. This means that you take the largest penalty, and that is all I will serve. I might get 30 years for murder, 20 years for kidnapping, 6 years for assault, but the most I will serve is the 30 years for the murder. I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase, "might as well hang for a sheep as a lamb." Well, most criminals have this mentality, and that is why they commit crime after crime. They know that once they have been caught, they can ask for all the other offences to be taken into consideration, and their sentences will run concurrently, so they are effectively punished for the latest crime only. My Justice Bill will do away with this, so criminals will be punished for every crime they commit.
So you are saying that you would be willing to plead guilty to a single murder charge?
It's not as simple as that, Sharon. The current justice system wouldn't allow the prosecutor to pick and choose the charges I face. That's why it's either a full trial where I can contest some of the charges, or I end this as I've always intended, and I've already explained my unwillingness to add to this country's financial burden.
Moving on, Mr. Gray, the police have given the names of 8 people they want to question in connection with your activities. What can you tell me about these people?
Gray had seen the announcement the previous evening, along with the mugshots of his friends. It hadn't been unexpected, just a little sooner than he had anticipated.
I can tell you that I know these people, but I don't know why the police want to talk to them. They have nothing to do with this.
Have they been?
Sorry, Sharon, but I came on today to give my reaction to Mr. Vincent's comment. I won't answer questions about these people as they have no connection with what I am doing.
Gray cut the connection before she could start her next question. Have I gotten my point across? He wondered. Only time would tell. You have been listening to Grey Justice, written by Alan McDermott, narrated by Andy Stevenson. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel to be informed when new episodes are available.